Welcome to Future Squared, the podcast all about corporate innovation, entrepreneurship, and self-empowerment. Future Squared brings you a double dose of innovation inspiration every week to help you and your company stay relevant in an era of rapid change and 10x your results in both your professional and personal life. Each week, I'll bring you corporate innovators, entrepreneurs, authors, keynote speakers, and thought leaders such as Steve Blank, David Allen, Brad Feld, Tim Harford, Karen Dillon, Jenny Blake, Neil Patel, Rand Fishkin, Pascal Finette, Ryan Blair, and Ash Moria, to name just a few. While every Friday, I'll bring you Fast Fix Friday, some quick, digestible insights to help you end your week on a high as you head off for the weekend. Future Squared is brought to you by Collective Campus, an innovation hub, school and consultancy based in Melbourne, Australia and Singapore that works with companies to help them adopt the mindset, methods and tools to navigate change and survive and thrive in an era of rapid disruption. If your organization needs help coming up with ideas, testing and turning ideas into reality, incubating teams, driving cultural change, or connecting and partnering with startups, then visit www.collectivecamp.us. And without further ado, here's today's podcast. Welcome back to Future Squared for episode number 205 with the one and only Tim O'Reilly. Tim popularized the terms open source and Web 2.0. He is the founder and CEO of O'Reilly Media, which delivers online learning, publishes books, runs conferences, urges companies to create more value than they capture, and tries to change the world by spreading and amplifying the knowledge of innovators. Tim has a history of convening conversations that reshaped the computer industry. In 1998, he organized a meeting where the term open source software was agreed on, and helped the business world understand its importance. In 2004, with the Web 2.0 Summit, he defined how Web 2.0 represented not only the resurgence of the web after the dot-com bust, but a new model for the computer industry, based on big data, collective intelligence, and the internet as a platform. In 2009, with his Gov 2.0 Summit, he framed a conversation about the modernization of government technology that has shaped policy and spawned initiatives at the federal, state, and local level and around the world. He has now turned his attention to implications of AI, the on-demand economy, and other technologies that are transforming the nature of work and the future shape of the business world. This is the subject of his new book, WTF, What's the Future and Why It's Up to Us. In addition to his role at O'Reilly Media, Tim is a partner at early-stage venture firm O'Reilly Alphatech Ventures and sits on the boards of Maker Media, Code for America, P&J, Civis Analytics, and PopVox. Expect to learn a hell of a lot in today's conversation, and prepare to listen to it multiple times to capture as much value from it as you can. 3 key things you will learn. 1. Tim's views on net neutrality. 2. What companies absolutely need to be doing to best prepare for the new economy. And 3. What Tim's views are on whether the 4th industrial revolution will leave most of us unemployed or not. Expect to learn that and a hell of a lot more in this conversation with the one and only Tim O'Reilly. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Glad to be with you.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the program. I mean, as somebody who's a key catalyst behind the open source and Web 2.0 movement, and, I think Eric Schmidt said something like, you are the man who really can make a whole industry happen. It's just an absolute honor to have you on the program. So thank you for making the time.
Okay, let's go to it.
Okay, well, Tim, on the back of 25 years of publishing, what you've said, I think it was on Tim Ferriss's show, what are fundamentally trivial technical books. I mean, you've published stuff like 92's, the whole Internet User Guide and Catalog. You published Unix Power Tools, Windows 98 in a nutshell. But I know initially you were saying that you wanted to do deep books, or you wanted to write deep books rather, that would go on to change the world. I think you saw inspiration from a book, and I forgot the name of the book, perhaps you can remind me, that entrepreneurship was a subversive pursuit. But now you've kind of come full circle, and now you've been given the opportunity after what's been a very decorated career in technology, in business, to go on and publish a book that can potentially change the world in WTF, What's the Future and Why It's Up to Us, which is essentially part memoir, part business strategy guide, and a call to action that explores the upside and potential downsides of today's technology. What was it like going off to write something like this as opposed to your typical sort of technical book?
Well, first off, I have been increasingly writing, doing activism, throughout my career. And it turns out, of course, that many of my technical books changed the world pretty darn significantly.
Yes.
But that's true. It is true that this is the first idea book that I've written. The thing that was really interesting about it is why I did it.
Mm-hmm.
because, of course, I've been writing a lot of these ideas on Medium, on LinkedIn, on various online channels. And I came to believe that there's still an intellectual culture that pays attention to the signaling of books. And not only of books, but of books from particular publishers. I could have published this myself. It would have been easier.
Yeah.
But publishing with a New York publisher of business books, says, to a certain class of person who follows certain channels, this is, a different kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that, of course, is a kind of an interesting segue into the topic of the book, because there are all these hidden structures in our minds and in our society that shape how we think and what we accept and what we don't accept. Mm-hmm. And a lot of what I have done successfully throughout my career is to notice things that other people weren't noticing and to reframe them in a way that help people to see things more deeply. And that's what I wanted to do again here. But I wanted to do it not just for technical people, but really to do it for business people, economists, policymakers.
Excellent. Yeah, and I think definitely get that message through the book. And I mean, what you just said there around what people accept, what they choose not to accept. It's funny, we just had a team stand up this morning and we were talking about the frog in the boiling water syndrome, where if you throw a frog in a boiling water, it'll jump straight out. But if you throw it in there when it's cold and you progressively make the water warmer over time to the point where it's boiling, you've cooked the frog. And it seems that over the past 20 years, we've progressively gotten more, I suppose, climatized to these technologies coming into our lives, but perhaps not enough people have been asking questions about, well, where is this going? What are the implications for society, for the economy as a whole? And I think your book makes a good, hard-damned effort as to trend spotting and trying to understand what the implications will be and what we need to consider, and therefore bringing that back to the subtitle of the book, effectively, why it's up to us, because we can choose to effectively dictate, if we do have that collaborative conversation, as to where this goes and whether or not it's beneficial for humanity going forward.
Yeah, now I have to say there's really two main threads in the book. And one of them is about technology and technology's role in our society. But there's also a major thread in which I'm using technology as a metaphor for the rest of society and a sort of an environment in which we can take lessons. So if you look at a platform, Microsoft in the heyday of Windows, or Google or Facebook today, there are kind of economies in a way. And it struck me that there was a lot to learn about the broader economy. So for example, I kind of traced the history of my battles with Microsoft over open source and battles over open standards for the web. And one of the pattern that I identify and that I lay out is that you see these technologies arise in a burst of inclusiveness and opportunity. The personal computer, the web, they were each incredible opportunities, and entrepreneurs flocked in and invented the future. And then a couple of players became dominant. In the first generation, it was Microsoft and Intel, and it became Google and Facebook and Apple, and different phases there. And then they start to extract more and more of the value from the system. And it starts to become a much less vibrant ecosystem. There's not enough opportunity for developers, and they go somewhere else. So people abandon the Windows ecosystem for the internet. Meanwhile, Microsoft didn't pursue the internet because it conflicted with their Windows revenue, and they tried to kind of turn it back from what it was into this controlled environment that was the one they wanted. And I go, that's actually an incredible metaphor for our society, where we basically have turned, say, over here in America, but also really around the world, from economic opportunity to an extractive economy in which a smaller and smaller number of people are getting very, very wealthy while the rest of the world suffers.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's really not about tech, shaping our society, although there's a major thread to that. It's also like, can we see things in tech and then turn around and see them in society? And so a deep thread in the core of the book is, there's four sections of the book. The first is called How to See the Future. The second one is the power of platforms. The third one is world ruled by algorithms. And then the fourth is it's up to us. But in that section on algorithms, my point is that if you understand how Google and Facebook and Uber, for that matter, are creating these algorithmic systems and understand what it means to manage an algorithmic system, you start to see a number of things. First, it's this constant battle. That Google, it's not like you write the rules once and you're done.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where government policy often goes wrong. We basically come up with a set of rules and expect them to just work for the next 30, 40, 50 years. Whereas, if Google is not continually updating the rules of how they do search, various kinds of bad actors will overtake it. So you kind of go, and I actually do an explicit transposition there with a chapter on government regulation and what we can learn from the management of Google search quality. And then I talk about Facebook and fake news as an example of how algorithms can go wrong. And in particular, the idea, algorithmic systems have what in the book I call a fitness function, but what other people call an objective function. Mm-hmm. And that is the thing that you ask the algorithm to optimize for. And so in Google, it's basically relevance. They want people to click on the first search result or the top ad. And when they do that, they know they got it right. If people click on the third ad, they think, oh, why did they do that? They must have thought the third ad was better. They click on the third result, they thought it was better. If they click on the first ad and they come right back, and then they click on the second, and then they click on the third, they go, oh, the third, that's the one that was the one that people actually were satisfied by. Mm-hmm. So let's raise that up. So they've got these algorithms that are trying to optimize for getting it right the first time. And Facebook, on the other hand, has a set of algorithms that are trying to optimize for engagement. Did people share this? Did they like it? Did they give people feedback? And that got people to share more. And they're kind of trying to create this immersive environment that gets people super engaged. And it turns out that just as people tried to spam Google search results, people also figured out how to game Facebook's algorithms. This is fake news and basically, fake headlines for profit, all kinds of things. And we can see that got out of control, and Facebook is trying to figure out how to rein it in. I use the image in some of my talks. I don't think I do this in the book, but of Mickey Mouse in Walt Disney's Fantasia, The Sorcerer's Apprentice, where he summons up the broomsticks to help him with his chores, fetching the water, and they go out of control and go at a binary explosion before long. There's thousands of brooms fetching water, flooding his master's castle, desperately trying to find the spell to stop it. And you kind of go, well, that's Mark Zuckerberg and his team right now. They basically, they said optimize for engagement, and it turned out not to be good engagement. There's a lot of hyper-partisanship and fake news. They're trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we stop that now? But then I kind of take that and I go, well, actually, let's look at our economy through that lens. Mm-hmm. And, of course, come to the conclusion that our financial markets are also like that. We had this idea that got put out in the 1970s that if we told companies optimize relentlessly for corporate profit as represented by their share price, literally Milton Friedman, famous economist, said, the social obligation of a business is to maximize its profits, and, that society would be better off. And it turned out people came in, they figured out how to game that system, and sure enough, our society has been hollowed out by the financial equivalent of fake news. We're no longer investing in people. We're no longer investing in the real economy. We have a bunch of people who are extracting value. So you can see both from the platform story that I told you earlier and from the algorithm story that I'm telling you now, there's this dynamic where these bountiful systems become extractive, and then they start to fail, and that we have to actually fix that. And so that's really kind of sets up this idea of like, what do we actually have to do as businesses and as a society? If this is a persistent pattern that runs through technology platforms, but also through our society. And so the conclusion that I come to in looking at history, first of all, is that we have to understand that the role of technology is to empower people. We fundamentally want to build a human-centered economy. The reason why we have technology at all is to solve human problems. Yeah. We don't, do technology for its own sake, and we don't do money for its own sake. And money is a tool that should be helping us to build a more prosperous world. And one of the things that we learn from platforms, and one of the things that we learn from economies, is that inclusive platforms and inclusive economies are more stable over the long term, and they're better for everybody, including the platform owner. So that's really it's kind of like this arc of what do we learn from tech about how to manage a society better.
Yeah, and I mean, something you've talked about as well was your conversations with the likes of Eric Schmidt, where you said, rather than the "don't be evil" mantra that they started off with, embracing the "create more value than you capture" mantra. And I had a conversation with Scott Galloway, who wrote The Four, the hidden DNA of Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google last week. And one of the things we touched on was that these companies, and like you said, it's effectively a small microcosm of what's happening in society at a greater level insofar as business is concerned, and it just speaks volumes about human nature and evolution and everything else. But these companies are getting larger and larger to the point where they can become monopolistic and dangerous. And I know this is something you explore in your book, and you say that over time, as networks reach monopoly or near monopoly status, they must wrestle with the issue of how to create more value than they capture, how much to take out of the ecosystem versus how much they must leave for other players in order for the marketplace to continue to thrive. Now, that to me sounds like a delicate balance. How do companies, whether they are large tech titans like your Apples and Facebooks of the world, or whether they are up-and-coming startups or traditional businesses, navigate that balance? Because we all have, I suppose, external demands on our time, on our value, like you said, external shareholder value. I mean, when I was going through university, when I did my business degree, that was the number one thing. It's all about optimizing shareholder returns, right? It's not about creating impact for society, or like you correctly pointed out, using technology to solve problems for humanity. I mean, that's what it is all about. So recently we saw Jeff Immelt being ousted from GE, and he went on this huge sort of lean startup transformation, trying to get the company to focus more about long-term rather than just short-term shareholder returns. And ultimately it proved to be his demise.
And they took him down.
Yeah.
That's right. And that's happened at other companies as well. And I think that's why I say our financial markets have become the equivalent of the first rogue AI. They're basically, the story in the Terminator, Elon Musk basically talks about the fear of future AI is that it's, basically this self-improving machine that's optimizing for the wrong thing. In a Vanity Fair article interview, he basically referred to, say, the self-improving strawberry picking robot that eventually decides that humans are in the way of strawberry fields forever.
Yes.
And, cute image. But we already have one of those. Our financial markets are saying humans are a cost to be eliminated. That's fundamentally the message that we have given to these companies. And you've got people, again, who were definitely involved in directing that. It's not like an independent system yet. But when you have here's a company like Apple, the most profitable company in history, and they're saying, well, we can't pay our suppliers more for our product because we have to actually keep our stock price high. Something is wrong. I mean, Apple, could have made different choices. And I think, so the thing that I guess I would just really say is, I do think that if there's a villain in my book, it is that shareholder value hypothesis. Because I think we have to actually look at this more, it's ultimately self-defeating. And you see companies, again and again, that could have been sustainable, that could have had a continuing value in our society, effectively be eluded, by their supposed shareholders. I mean, when Carl Icahn, invests $3.6 billion in Apple stock, he didn't give Apple any investment. They didn't need his money. Basically, Carl Icahn did that as a way of holding, Apple's feet to the fire to get them to do stock buybacks, which they borrowed money to do. So they would just make him and people like him richer. And it created negative economic value for society. It made, it really didn't circulate to ordinary people. Whereas if Apple had taken that $100 billion that they spent on share buybacks and had spent it on R&D, had spent it on paying, their clerks more in the Apple stores, they would have actually had a trickle down on all of American retail. If they paid more for their products, that maybe they brought their factories back from China to the U.S. We'd have a totally different picture. I mean, there's a lot of things to do with that money besides give it to the financial industry. There's a whole set of arguments in there, but I don't want to spend too much time on that. But when you ask how do companies do it, it's pretty clear. If you understand your platform depends on your ecosystem, you will do things differently. And we do see examples of this with Google, for example. They basically saw that the smartphone was a threat to the open web. Mm-hmm. They saw that the rise of the carriers owning more and more of the internet infrastructure was a threat to the open web. In each of those cases, they spent a lot of money to respond. I mean, they basically created Android and they gave it away as open source so that Apple would not this next wave. And so they created a whole lot of value for other people. That's a great example of create more value than you capture. And they kept the web alive on the smartphone. Without that, it wouldn't have happened. They spent a lot of money on things like Open Social, trying to do the same thing, in response to the threat from Facebook. So they were actually acting that way. But in other ways, they forget that value. So for example, I just recently did some analysis, and very superficial analysis, I should say, and there may be other reasons for it when I dig a little deeper. But in 2012, 30% of Google's ad revenue came from ads on other people's sites, and in 2017, down to 18%. Right. So that means, one of the plausible explanations from that is that things that used to be done on other people's sites are now being done directly on Google sites. And I can think of many examples. Like I used to use a little site called FlightAware, and now I type a flight number into Google, and bingo, up comes my flight arrival time. They've obviously been competing with Yelp. Yelp has actually sued them over this. TripAdvisor. There's a lot of areas where they're eating their ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And because there's so many websites, it's less obvious than it was in the era of the PC when, Microsoft, with their Windows platform said, oh, spreadsheet, nice category. Word processing, nice category. We'll take that. And they use their platform because there were only 4 or 5 really big applications, right? And they basically took them one after the other. I think the only 2 that survived were Photoshop and Quicken. So they kind of basically ate their ecosystem, and of course they tried to eat the web as well. And unfortunately, the open source movement kept them from doing that, and that led to the next wave, which was this Google dominated wave. So part of what my argument is there's a self-interest in keeping your ecosystem alive, and I think we see this today. There's a self-interest in our economy in making it better for ordinary people, not just for very rich people. That's why we're having all of this upheaval.
Yeah. Well, there's a hell of a lot there that I can use as a segue, Tim. So thank you for giving me so much to work with. But one of the things you pointed out was how Google saw that smartphones could be a threat to search, and therefore they made moves to, I suppose, offset the risk of that. And as most good entrepreneurs do, if you respond to a threat quickly enough, then it's an opportunity. Now, today, there's a hell of a lot of talk out there about corporate innovation, what it is, how to go about it. A lot of companies are spending a lot of money on what usually amounts to corporate innovation theater. But in your book, you've got something called a business model map for the next economy. And similar to what you mentioned there about Google identifying that threat, they look to mitigate that. And you've identified a number of, I suppose, things that companies should be thinking about going forward, such as services on demand. You mentioned algorithms, magical user experiences, augmented workers, talent and resources on demand. Are these the kind of things that companies of all persuasions should be thinking about in order to prepare for what's coming?
Absolutely. And I think it's really easy to think that only Google and Facebook and Amazon are platforms. Mm-hmm. Every company, in some sense, is a platform. I look at my company, O'Reilly Media. We started out as a book publisher and then became a conference provider, and then we have this big online learning platform called Safari Books Online. Mm-hmm. And we think of all of the people who don't work for us but depend on us. We have authors, we have conference speakers, we have all these people who are now, like our hottest product on the platform is live online training. So we have trainers, we have partner publishers in Safari because it was originally and now partner training providers. So we basically have built a channel, we built a platform, and we think about the health of that platform all the time. And we literally will have discussions that say, wow, when we introduced live online training, our partners, we evangelized it to them, said, this is our new product offering, you should get on board, we think it's going to be really hot. But they did it. We rolled out 100 online trainings, and our next one of our big partners only rolled out 10, and we ended up taking a huge proportion of the monthly revenue. And we basically said, this is a problem because it has to work for them as well as for us.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's how we think. And so, if you take that, kind of model where you say, okay, we need this to be a win-win. Take a company like Amazon. They sit there and they do notice the most interesting product categories, and they come out with a private label product. So does Walmart. So does basically every company. Oh yeah, we're not going to buy the Duracell batteries. We're going to, kind of have a private label one. And we now have this big Amazon Basics line. So you go, well, that's business, is what people would normally say. And you go, yeah, maybe it is. But at some point, you do enough of that, people say, well, they're not really a good place to do business anymore because they take all the most profitable products. And they go somewhere else, and there will be a tipping point, and I think that's what we see again and again in platforms. So you have to actually think about your suppliers as people who depend on your platform, and you have to think about your partners as people who depend on your platform, and you have to make it work for them as well as for yourself.
100%. And that's something you alluded to as well in your book, where you talk about companies like Instagram. There's that famous quote that says, well, when Instagram IPO'd when they were acquired by Facebook for $1 billion that same year, they had 13 employees. Kodak went bankrupt. They had thousands of employees. But what people often overlook is the downstream effects of Instagram's success. All of the other players in that ecosystem, the cloud storage companies and all that sort of stuff that Instagram effectively empowers. It's not just Instagram operating in in its own little silo.
That's absolutely right. I think you have to understand the whole ecosystem value of a company, and the flows of value are not always obvious. I tell the story in the book of something I call the clothesline paradox. It's after a piece written in 1973 by a guy named Steve Baer in the Successor of the Whole Earth catalog. It basically says, you put your clothes in the dryer and you use measured energy. You get a utility bill, you put them on the clothesline, it just disappears from our accounting. And I use this to talk about the value created by open source software. So you look at, here was Microsoft making hundreds of billions of dollars in sales. The biggest, Linux company, Red Hat was, a tiny fraction of that. You could go, well, open source didn't really have as big an impact. But you go, wait a minute, no. It was basically like hanging the clothes on the line. All this value happened. It just didn't get captured by a company like Red Hat. In fact, a big chunk of it was captured by Google and Amazon, who built on top of open source software. But it was also captured by ordinary small businesses, who, because as a result of open source software, for example, get to have a website that costs them $3 a month, which advertises their services, far more effectively than what they used to do. And there's all these hidden sources of value that come when things are given away. And so I think that it's not always a simple calculation to see where you're creating value and where you're capturing it. But I think we could do better at accounting for it. And I think it's also, as I've been thinking more about this, I've really been thinking about, do we need to change the fundamental financial statements that we use to run our businesses to do more ecosystem accounting? Yeah,
and that's an interesting one. Changing the actual maps that we, I suppose, use to navigate the world, and something else, apart from the traditional financial statements, what Eric Ries has been talking about is the formulation of a long-term stock exchange as well, which turns the traditional sort of investor decision-making rationale on its head.
That's right.
So on those downstream effects, I guess, when you're talking about today's businesses, yes, there are those downstream effects to different cloud players and so on. But I guess by better understanding and better measuring and accounting for that, like you said, then perhaps we can compare that to, say, the downstream effects of businesses from a bygone era, or those businesses that are still incumbents in their industry but are being slowly disrupted by other players and other business model innovations emerging. So, you kind of allude to this in the book as well, where you talk about Kodak and their downstream players. So, how do you see that the question of, are we creating more value than we're replacing insofar as those downstream effects are concerned? Because you look at companies like Netflix, obviously 3,500 employees, $70+ billion market cap. Last time I checked, when you compare that to, say, a Blockbuster, which was 60,000 employees and only a $5 billion market cap. So insofar as those companies are concerned, yes, there is a clear distinction. But what about the downstream effects of those two companies? Did Blockbuster have just as much as Netflix? And if we can answer that question, then we can have a more enlightened, informed conversation about, is AI, is automation actually taking our jobs away?
I mean, I think there's a huge job ahead for economists to figure out the distributional effects of these changes.
Yeah.
The thing I will say, I won't speak specifically to Netflix and Blockbuster, but there's starting to be a fair amount of evidence that, for example, the switch from retail to e-commerce, which a lot of people were starting to say, well, this is a retail apocalypse, the loss of all these jobs. There are actually more jobs and better jobs being created in e-commerce that are being lost in retail. They're literally, I think that, there's a couple of million people in the U.S. who work in retail. We're already up to, we're heading to sort of 1 million delivery drivers for on-demand, services. We're talking about, hundreds of thousands of people in warehouses for e-commerce. Michael Mandel of the Progressive Policy Institute did some analysis, and looks like the net is actually job increase, not job decrease. And the jobs that have been created in warehouses are actually paying more. And that kind of comes back to this business model map of the next economy. And it's sort of like what I try to do is to map out a bunch of factors that work together to make successful companies in the current economy.
Yeah.
And so this is all based on a wonderful quote from some consultants I worked with back around 2000, Dan and Meredith Beam. And they kind of made the point. They said a business model is the way that all the parts of the business work together to create customer value and strategic advantage for the company.
I love that.
And so, I actually started out by analyzing Uber, and you can see things like why just adding an app doesn't make a taxi company into Uber. Why? Because they don't have the marketplace of enough drivers to be able to get people matched up in a couple of minutes that Uber is shooting for. Uber's, the reason they've spent so many billions of dollars is to grow the size of the driver base. And the very thing that taxi companies hate about Uber, which is that it uses Uber and Lyft, sites like that, they use these, non-professional drivers, is why they have enough supply to be able to do that. So, the app and the marketplace of non-professional amateur drivers are two parts of the business model, and they go together. They work together to create this value. So in a similar way, so I just tried to generalize that, and of course also, Uber and Lyft and companies like that are also spending a huge amount of money to acquire customers, to persuade people to give up their cars, to use these kinds of services more often because they believe that they're reliable enough. And again, it's like you can't make that promise. People aren't going to, switch their behavior. So anyway, coming back to this, I do identify this idea that, yes, there are all these capabilities in technology, and we need to think through where are those opportunities. Just like, the first version of the connected taxi cab was a screen in the back, where they could show you ads and news. That wasn't actually very interesting. And then somebody goes, oh, no, actually, with the sensors and the phones, and the drivers and the passengers, we can match them up in real time. Awesome. So it's that kind of breakthrough understanding of what technology makes possible now. It should be something that's front and center for every, rethink your business model, rethink your customer offering based on things that were previously impossible.
Yeah.
But also then there's another piece that I really like to bring out, which is this idea of the augmented worker. One of the things that we really learn from a company like Uber is that they're able to put more people to work because they use the intelligence in the smartphone app to effectively give those drivers new superpowers. Unlike an ordinary taxi cab driver who just had to drive around until they found a passenger, or maybe they get a call from the dispatcher to go pick up somebody in the house. It's like they have this app, and it makes them magically able to find people wherever they are, and then it magically gives them the power, even if they don't know the city really well, to take them wherever they want to go. It expands the geographic range. Anyway, so you start thinking, well, how would that apply to my business? Well, look at how Apple did that. They basically said, let's get rid of the cash register. Let's, let put all of the stock in the back. We don't need to have it on the shelf. We don't have to have people wait in line. We'll have lots of smartphone wielding people in the store. Again, it's the augmented worker. That's the super retail clerk who knows what the inventory is on the spot, who can help you. Can take your email address and all the stored information, bang, and then they hand you your product and you walk out the door. And then of course Amazon's pushing that even further. With different experiments. Well, yeah, sure, we'll have it on the shelf, but we'll have sensors and we'll be watching you, and you'll just pick it up and walk out. We'll charge you. It's like there's all kinds of amazing experiences but they're all about technology used to augment people. Amazon warehouse workers. The robots are helping them do more, do it faster, do it better. Not just So this mythology that you use technology to get rid of people, to do less, to do the same thing at lower cost. And the companies that are really doing breakthroughs are the companies that are using technology to do more. And so that idea of using technology to augment is really central. And then there's this idea that every company needs to think of itself as a platform, that's matching on a marketplace, that's matching up buyers and sellers in real time. And it has to understand the laws of marketplaces. It has to understand that algorithmic matching is the heart of many of the great successes. Google redesigned its ad marketplace in a way that was much more intelligent, and Uber redesigned the taxi cab marketplace so it was more intelligent. Amazon has optimized the layout of its warehouses, the way it sells things in a way that's much more intelligent. And this idea of marketplace design, as the heart of a modern business, I think is another really key piece. And then there's this idea that was really summed up beautifully by Michael Schrage in his book, Who Do You Want Your Customers to Become? And that's the idea that you actually have to create your customers. You don't find them, you create them. Before the web, before Google and Wikipedia, people didn't expect that you could just find out anything, anytime. Mm-hmm. Right? But now people take that for granted. Before Uber, people didn't think, oh yeah, I can just summon a car and it'll show up. So they kind of create. Great businesses create new customers who have new expectations. Apple with Siri. And now, of course, Amazon with Alexa, everybody else is kind of chasing this one. We've now changed the expectation. People believe that they can talk to the thin air and devices will respond. It's changing people's expectations.
Yeah, and I think that's something that companies have a responsibility to do, to discover that unimaginable and to create their customers, particularly as they do begin to augment their workers or to dabble with augmented humanity, because you can take that one way or the other. I mean, classic case is at law firms where a lot of the junior associates may review contracts, but now you have contract review automation tools that more law firms are using. And what that means is you don't need anywhere near as many associates doing that work, and you just need a senior associate to look over the output from that sophisticated machine to say, okay, this.
Yeah, I don't actually buy that. Mm-hmm. I think that's that classic mistake. That's going to be companies who go, oh yeah, wow, we can just do without the associates. And that's a little bit like Amazon. If Amazon had said, oh, great, with all these robots, we can have fewer warehouse workers. We'll have exactly the same service as everybody else. You'll get your product in 3 days. They didn't do that. They said, no, we can actually use these robots to make our warehouses more efficient. We can get more products out faster. And in a lot of areas now in the U.S., you get your products same day, right? That's crazy. So why would a company settle for kind of saying, wow, I have this, powerful automation tool, and I'm going to give you exactly the same service. And it's likely to be worse. I mean, we saw this with voice response systems, for example, and everybody hated them, right? And we got worse service as a result of them. All the companies did was they gave, this idea of misallocation of who gets what and why. The customers got a shittier experience. The company's got a fatter bottom line for the short term, but that the opportunity is for companies to give better customer service again. And so again, Amazon's cleaning everybody's clock because they use technology to up the ante to do more. So in your case of the law firm, I go, okay, great. We actually used to miss a lot of stuff in contracts, and we didn't notice conflicts, and what we can do now is we can actually give you way better service with more junior people, so we can drop our prices, so that we can make legal services more affordable, we can service more clients, we can grow our business. Which of those sounds like a better scenario to you? We're going to do exactly the same thing. It's just going to be cheaper for us and worse for you. Or we're going to use this technology and we're going to make it amazingly better for you. You're going to grow your business, and you're going to kill your competition that's using the first strategy.
Yeah, look, that is definitely the better scenario. I've seen it play out with a number of law firms where they are hiring less associates, not getting rid of them altogether, but just saying, okay, we don't need as many. So I totally, wholeheartedly believe that by using this technology, we're freeing people up to work on more value-adding work, right? Where they can be their best, they can do fulfilling work, they're more inspired and more energized to go to work because they're not just doing rote stuff. And I think that's effectively what companies should be doing, but whether or not they choose to do that is another story. And I guess on that, I've been fortunate enough to speak to a few people like Kevin Kelly and Tyler Cowen on this podcast, one being a technologist and the other a economist. And it's funny to see how they see the world very differently. Kevin was all about, AI is not going to replace us. This wave of innovation, the fourth industrial revolution, we're just going to create more jobs than we destroy. It might take time, as was the case with our transition from steam to electricity, which took pretty much 4 decades to start to reap the economic benefits. But we will create more than we destroy. Whereas Tyler Cowen was all about the numbers, and he basically said, well, since the turn of the century, productivity skyrocketed, yet median household income is more or less flatlined and even started to go backwards. And he had really grave concerns about where it's all going. So
I'm kind of with Kevin.
Yep.
And I'm also with Tyler to the extent that, yes, that's happening. And the question is that really the fault of technology? Mm-hmm. Or is it the fault of this kind of mental model that I've just been explicating? Which is, we're going to take all of these benefits of technology and we're going to give them to the owners of capital. That is, we're going to give customers worse service, we're going to give employees less money, and we're going to take more profit. That's an allocation decision.
Yep.
The reason why household income is falling is because corporate profits have been climbing, and because we've been using technology, to do less rather than to do more.
No, that's great, and that's exactly it ties in with the conversation we've been having today. But I guess as technology is racing ahead, as companies need to start thinking about their own business model maps for the next economy, one thing you touched on very, very briefly earlier in the conversation was government, and how we've come up with policies, say 3, 4, 5, 6 decades ago, potentially in some cases, if not more, that perhaps aren't quite fit for purpose today. How, if at all, does government respond? I know you've been a big advocate of what you call Gov 2.0 for almost a decade now. Keen to understand where you think government, or what you think government's role is insofar as regulating this new economy is concerned, because something that Kevin also mentioned was if you regulate something too early, particularly technology, then you don't give it the time and space it needs to evolve into something much greater that can be quite a tool for humanity.
I would agree with Kevin on that. But I think that this dialogue that the role of government is regulation misses the point.
Yep.
First of all, government is a platform for our society. It's a means of collective action. I don't want to go out and build my own road. I've done that. I lived in the country, and I and 3 neighbors had to maintain a quarter-mile stretch of road. It's a real pain in the ass. I like my government. I'd much rather pay my taxes, and actually I paid a heavier tax for my quarter-mile stretch of road than I ever paid for any roads that I use out in public, because we were shared by everybody. So this was a road that was shared by three families. So believe me, we want government as a platform for collective action.
Yep.
And then the question is, how do we make it more effective? Government has a problem in that it doesn't keep up with the best of society. We basically built these procurement processes that are based on trying to protect against fraud and graft and so on, but they actually slow down technology adoption and increase the cost of everything. It's interesting. Clay Johnson, who used to be a presidential innovation fellow before that at the Sunlight Foundation, did this wonderful presentation once where he talked about Moore's Law.
And you kind of, again, the doubling every 18 months has given us these consumer services that get better and better and better. And if government procurement processes only slow down, government by 4 or 5 years, right? That's 3 more law cycles.
Yeah.
Right? 3 doublings. And you follow that out over a decade or two, and you see how government services, we're literally using government services that are effectively 20 years out of date. They finally got up to the early days of the web in some cases, if we're lucky. There's websites that are made of big piles of PDFs. It's just and you think about how long. It's like, why is it that some government agency will take 18 months? Here in the U.S., our Veterans Administration takes 18 months to determine if a discharged veteran is eligible for benefits. How is it that Facebook can onboard somebody in seconds and keep track of them? It's like, this is this Moore's law problem. And we have to get government, kind of caught up with the best practices of modern technology. And that's a lot of what we do with the nonprofit that my wife started, Code for America. But there's we try to help governments catch up. But there's also a role for government in making sure that the playing field is level. And it does get into regulation, but we got to get away from the idea of regulation is sort of the government, it's sort of the bureaucrat who doesn't really understand. And I get all that. That sometimes happens. There's a much more profound sense in which we already live in a regulatory regime, and we take it for reality. There's a tax system in which certain things are taxed and other things aren't. That incredible tilting of the playing field, we make people sort of act as though that's the natural state of the economy. So, for example, back to this sort of question of the returns being allocated to capital, we actually have a tax system that encourages that. We have rules on executive compensation that encourage that. And it's not natural. We could have had rules, and they do, for example, in other countries. In Germany, for example, they have rules that are much more focused on sharing the benefits of productivity gains with workers and with society. And they have a very successful capitalist economy, just like we do in America and in Australia. You go, it turns out that giving most of the returns to capital aren't the only way to do it. Same thing. Big social safety net in Scandinavian countries, they're quite successful. So we have to actually get the idea that government regulation is present whether we like it or not. The closest thing we have to unregulated states are failed states. You want to live in a world with no regulation, go to Somalia, go to Yemen, places I don't really know well, but they're basically places where effectively the rules are made up at the whim of the people who have the most power, and of course we're kind of getting there in modern countries as well. And we want rules, we want to have a level playing field. Again, think about, I use sports analogies all the time. Would you want a sporting event with no regulation, no rules? What would it be? Everybody just kind of makes up their own as they go along.
Well, that's it. I guess it's about having the right rules there.
That's right. It's about having the right rules.
Excellent. Well, look, just on regulation, I guess we've only got 3 minutes left. Obviously, there's a lot of talk right now about net neutrality. Tim, any quick thoughts on that being rolled back and whether or not we should be concerned, or are there other forms of centralization that perhaps pose a greater threat?
Well, I think, there's no question that this is one of those classic who gets what and why questions with a bunch of big companies are fighting over who gets the benefits of the current system. Mm-hmm. But I do think that the system that we've had for the internet has served us pretty well. That being said, you're right. There are vast centralizing forces which are leading to enormous gains on the part of very few companies. And to the extent that companies like Google and Facebook are reaping incredible gains from the current system, and that current system is becoming less open, less vibrant, through other means, and then you kind of look at the anti-net neutrality people and go, well, if you're going to take it all, well, we want to take some of it. I kind of go, well, look, guys, if you really want to be for net neutrality, make sure that you actually are supporting an open internet as opposed to just taking all of the pie for yourself.
Exactly. And that just comes back to the underlying premise of the book, which people can pick up on Amazon. They can find out more about O'Reilly Media at O'Reilly.com, and they can hit you up on Twitter at Tim O'Reilly. Is there anywhere else that people should check out?
Well, I have a site for the book called WTFeconomy.com. And also, if you go to tim.o'reilly.com, you'll go specifically to all of my talks and interviews and podcasts and so on.
Perfect. Well,
my museum.
Fantastic. I'll make sure to add that to the show notes, Tim. Thank you so much for giving up some time to appear on Future Squared. Being an awesome guest, as I was expecting. I'll have to listen to this one about 5 times just to make sure I can note down all of the key insights and takeaways. So thank you again for your time.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Hey guys, it's Steve again. If you're picking up what we're putting down, we'd love it if you took just a minute of your time to like, share, or subscribe to Future Squared on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. It would mean a hell of a lot to the team here who work effortlessly to bring you thought leaders and experts on topics of corporate innovation, entrepreneurship, and self-improvement on a weekly basis. As always, you can find more resources on innovation, including blogs, books, podcasts, videos, webinars, and tools at www.collectivecamp.us. If you'd like to connect with me on Twitter, you can do so at Steve Glaveski. That's Glaveski. Until next time, keep innovating. Future Squared out.